What's up? I'm Doug Kyed. This is PFF Wire. I'm joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Tomorrow we kick off the season, and a lot of news already heading into a big action-packed week one.
I am very, very, very excited for football to start on Thursday night because we've been talking about so much preseason news and contracts and all this stuff, but we love talking about contracts on this show. So let's get into one right away. Buffalo Bills tight end Dawson Knox signed a 4-year contract extension. Brad, take us through some of the details on this contract because I find it to be a very fascinating one.
It certainly is. I mean, you go ahead and look at some of his PFF grades, not super high. He's a good player around the 60s, but never has really broken out and had a very well-graded year. Did have 9 touchdowns last year and about 600 receiving yards. I can tell you from one person I talked to in Buffalo, they've loved his growth every offseason. They say he comes in and is markedly improved every year. So I think they're just betting on that to continue happening, but becomes the 6th highest paid tight end in the NFL, just under $14 million per year, a very strong $31 million guarantee. I think the most notable thing here, though, is Buffalo, once again, as they've done with so many players, is getting a deal done early. We know Darren Waller could get signed soon. Obviously, 2 tight ends on the franchise tag. They get their guy done early. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but it might age very well, very fast.
Yeah, first of all, I just turned off my air conditioner, so if I had some weird background noise for the first couple minutes of the show, I apologize. But this feels like a great deal for the Buffalo Bills, like you just said. And I think it actually speaks, I've got kind of a take on this. I think it speaks somewhat to the culture of Buffalo, of the Bills, that someone like Dawson Knox is willing to maybe take a little bit less money to re-sign with the Buffalo Bills to ensure that he will be there for at least 4 more years through the 2026 season. And he said that he bought a house in Buffalo. He wanted to stay with the Bills. And I mean, it feels like he probably could have gotten a little bit more if he had played out the season, gone into free agency. I don't think he would have wound up being the 6th highest paid tight end in the NFL, but wanted to play with Josh Allen, wanted to stay in Buffalo. So I think that this ultimately is a great thing for the Bills. You mentioned he hasn't graded overly well for us through the first 3 seasons of his career, but he also almost doubled his snaps last season. I think that he could wind up being probably the 3rd option in that offense, could even wind up being the 2nd option in the offense behind Stephon Diggs this season. I think we all expect that Gabe Davis breakout this season, but it's probably going to be Diggs, Davis, and then Dawson Knox. And then you talk about all the running backs, but 3rd option in that high-powered offense being the 6th highest paid tight end in the NFL seems like a great deal on paper for the Bills.
No, 100%. And like you said, he's showing the progression. Tight end, as we've studied, is one of the harder positions to adjust at the NFL level. So there's always going to be a bit of projection in some of these deals. And I also agree, though. I think we've seen with Josh Allen, Deion Dawkins, Tre'Davious White, this has now become a destination that guys want to go to, and they will take some more money to stick around. Sounds like him and Josh Allen are very close, which is maybe why he was targeted so frequently in the red zone last year with those 9 touchdowns, and that number can only continue to go up.
He had a massive game against the Patriots in the playoffs as well. Maybe that's a sign of things to come here in 2022. I know that everyone thinks about, that Gabe Davis game against the Chiefs, but that Dawson Knox game against the Patriots could kind of wind up being the same thing for the Buffalo Bills. Let's talk a little bit more about that Thursday night game. Van Jefferson, Rams wide receiver, will not play against the Buffalo Bills because of that knee surgery that he had. Obviously, on the Bills side, you won't have Tre'Davious White at cornerback as well. If we're just talking about, players who won't play in that game, Tre'Davious White, probably a significantly bigger deal than Van Jefferson just right off the top.
No question about it. I mean, this is a huge loss for the Buffalo Bills. It's one of the higher totals of the week at 52.5 right now. Yes, you no longer have Van Jefferson, but an Allen Robinson, a guy that a Tre'Davious White could battle with, a big body receiver on the outside. It's a notable loss, and I think will lead to a lot of points. It sounds like Kaiir Elam and Dane Jackson will be the starters on the outside, but they'll work in some other players and try to get as many looks as they can against an obviously dynamic Los Angeles Rams offense.
Yeah, you've got Teron Johnson in the slot. Like you said, Dane Jackson, I think will definitely be one of those starters. But just from kind of even listening to some of the Bills beat reporters out there, doesn't seem 100% that it would even possibly be Kyrie Elam on the other side. Could wind up being Christian Benford, who's another rookie. So definitely a lot of questions at the cornerback position for the Bills, going up against a team that's obviously got Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson on the other side, even though they don't have Van Jefferson. I'm interested to see who that third wide receiver to step up is actually going to be now for the Rams, because Ben Skowronek, I know, has been getting a lot of looks in the offense. You'd like it to be Tutu Atwell since they spent a second-round pick on him last year. I think that he was one of those early risers in camp. Maybe didn't finish off that strong, but for me personally, I'd probably prefer to see Tutu Atwell in this situation, see what he can do in an opportunity like this than one of the other guys in that offense.
I think he's also very different than what you get out of a Cooper Kupp and an Allen Robinson. He's a smaller, speedy outside receiver. You can throw him in the slot. Nevertheless, he's a vertical threat, and I don't think you would consider Cooper Kupp or Allen Robinson really a vertical threat. You can throw over the top to those guys, but they're not beating guys off the line and getting downfield in a hurry. So I think it adds a dimension to their offense that you also probably want with, both Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, not 100%. So you want to create as much space as humanly possible in the short and intermediate areas. And I think Tutu Atwell goes the longest in accomplishing that goal.
Definitely. Let's get into another game in this week's slate that will not have a star cornerback out there, and that's J.C. Jackson, not going to play against the Las Vegas Raiders. Chargers actually have some better depth at cornerback, though, than the Bills did. They've got Asante Samuel on one side. Looks like Michael Davis is going to be stepping in for J.C. Jackson. They've got Bryce Callahan in the slot. So just as far as, obviously you'd want your high-paid, free agent addition J.C. Jackson out there in week one, but they're better suited to replace J.C. Jackson. At the same time, they have to go up against Devontae Adams. They have to go up against Hunter Renfrow. It's going to be a huge challenge for them without J.C. Jackson this week as well.
No question about it. But I think this is the key for me that, the Chargers hype that happens every offseason, and we all kind of joke about it. I think the difference this year is, yes, we've highlighted J.C. Jackson a lot as a big ticket free agent acquisition that makes a notable difference on this defense. But the difference for me in years past is Michael Davis was basically their number one corner last year. Now you have an injury to J.C. Jackson, and you have him slotting in as your third corner with the ascension of second-round pick in last year's draft, Asante Samuel. So the depth for me is also better. It's better up front on that defensive line. There's just more depth at a lot of different spots, which is obviously super important in the NFL, and in a big divisional matchup against these Las Vegas Raiders and against Devontae Adams. You did pay J.C. Jackson probably to go up against Devontae Adams. Now he misses this first opportunity, but you're not in a terrible spot, which you could have been, a couple of years ago.
Definitely. And we'll just have to wait, another week, maybe two or whatever, to see what that defense actually looks like with all of the pieces in it. I'm very excited to see what Brandon Staley can do with that defense this year. But like I said, we'll have to wait until J.C. Jackson gets fully healthy to see everyone out there on the field. Let's talk about the Raiders a little bit, though, because Darren Waller still has not signed a contract extension. He said, I think it was yesterday, that regardless of whether he signs that extension or not, he will be on the field in week one. So clearly a good thing for the Raiders, but I might also take that as Darren Waller having some confidence that a deal will get done before they actually take the field on Sunday.
Yeah, I talked with a few folks around the league, and the consensus is they think this deal does get done before the game begins. If not, like you said, he might be willing to play because he knows it's going to happen. The Raiders, if memory serves me, are willing to negotiate a couple weeks into the season, so it's not like they have some hard and fast deadline and are going to refuse to negotiate after that point. And I know it's a new regime, but the Patriots tend to be okay with that as well. So I think this deal does get done. I think Darren Waller does become the NFL's highest paid tight end, in terms of new money average per year. I think Dawson Knox, like we said, it was a good deal for Buffalo, but it's yet another deal in the 13, 14 million per year range for a guy who, for his career, has about as many receiving yards as Darren Waller had alone in 2020. So I think it does get done. I think maybe it's a little bit backloaded, but I do think he will, become the highest paid tight end in the NFL and maybe the next week.
It's also just talking about tight end contracts in general. I know we've had this conversation a lot, but Dawson Knox, 6th highest paid tight end. He's making less than $14 million a year. I don't understand why that position isn't valued higher than other positions across the NFL. And it all comes back to what we've talked about before, where, the best players at the position sign their contracts relatively early, didn't get the money that we've seen now since wide receiver contracts and everything have blown up. I'd love for Darren Waller to become that guy who exceeds, 20, 25 million, starts making wide receiver money, but it's not going to happen. And we've had this conversation multiple times before, but I don't know. It's just those tight end contracts need to catch up, and they're just not going to in this current system that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with the attrition of the position. It is, I think, viewed as a more and more valuable position every season. It's obviously the only position where you need to be a legitimately good blocker for most players, and also, of course, want to be a receiving threat. But, the issue is you have guys like Robert Gronkowski retiring at 29 the first time around, and so teams are able to, kind of go to them, like you said, get these early extensions done and give them lower value, like a Dallas Goedert, like a Mark Andrews, now like a Dawson Knox. And it's just hard to turn down that money when I'm playing at a spot where I could be lost for the year at any moment's notice. And so I think eventually some player has to bet on themselves, maybe push through a franchise tag like we're seeing this season, or have guys like Travis Kelce that are still elite entering his age 33 season and kind of buck that trend and get rid of that stereotype of it being a shorter career. But until that happens, it is the best value position for teams right now. You can get great impact players for almost nothing.
Definitely. And very curious to see how everything goes with Dalton Schultz this year with the Dallas Cowboys. Clearly, they've lost some weapons on offense, and he's a guy who could really benefit from that, playing on the franchise tag. If he can have another massive season, maybe he's a guy who finally kind of breaks through with that, not wide receiver type money, but, kind of elite tier tight end money. Let's talk about some other injuries around the NFL. Let's first get in on Zach Wilson not playing week 1. We're going to see Joe Flacco starting week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens. This was interesting to me because as recently as Monday, Robert Saleh was saying, we'll see if Zach Wilson can practice on Wednesday. If Zach Wilson can practice on Wednesday, then he'll probably play week 1. Now Robert Saleh comes out and says the earliest that Zach Wilson is going to play is week 4 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I don't really know what happened here in 2 days, but we're looking at Joe Flacco for at least 3 weeks to start the season as the Jets starting quarterback.
Yeah, so some of the gamesmanship with injuries is, I think, one of the more confusing things that still happens in the NFL. I mean, for starters, you're not really tricking the Baltimore Ravens and saying, oh, you have to prepare for Zach Wilson, and if you don't, you have to prepare for Joe Flacco. Newsflash, they had Joe Flacco on their roster for 11 seasons. So they're fairly familiar with Joe Flacco, and I think they can multitask there. But, yeah, it is funny to go from he might play to now week 4 against the Pittsburgh Steelers is the earliest. And I watched the press conference. He's stressed. That's the earliest he could go back. That's not our expectation. I also think it's funny, just random scheduling quirk. He might miss playing the entire AFC North, They play the entire division the first 4 weeks of the season. So I guess none of those teams gets an unfair advantage going up against Joe Flacco, a quarterback they're all familiar with as well, with his time spent there. But yeah, I mean, just a huge crushing blow for this Jets team. It's so hard to evaluate these guys. You want to know what you have in a Zach Wilson. You've spent on offensive line. You've spent on wide receivers. You've surrounded him with talent and say, all right, now we can evaluate him. And if we're picking high next year, we need to know, are we taking another quarterback in a potentially great class, or do we take an edge rusher like a Will Anderson and trust that Zach Wilson takes those steps? And the fewer games you have to evaluate, the harder that becomes.
It does seem, I'm not the biggest Zach Wilson guy. I wasn't necessarily the biggest Zach Wilson guy last year either. It seemed like there was a possibility that was a one-year wonder at BYU in 2020. He was not the same player in 2019. Certainly didn't look like the same player last year, but it is kind of amazing that last year was such a great quarterback class, and we're already talking about the possibility that they could move on from him after 2 seasons. Personally, I know it might not be the smartest move here, but I'd probably wait at least another year after this one. But if Joe Flacco looks better than Zach Wilson this year, then they would almost basically have no choice but to make that decision to move on after this season. So I don't know. They've definitely got some better pieces around Zach Wilson this season. We'll see if that benefits Joe Flacco to start the year, but I still feel like expectations for the Jets overall are pretty low this season.
Yeah, certainly low. And at a certain point, they obviously had to undergo a complete overhaul, a complete rebuild. But this is year 3 for general manager Joe Douglas, who I have lauded. I think his process is sound. But if the results don't follow at a certain point, the Jets might make sweeping changes and not just the quarterback position, which is also an unfortunate component of this, is that you look at the schedule, they have a gauntlet after week 4. It's 5 or 6 very tough games in a row, playing Jacoby Brissett of the Cleveland Browns and Mitchell Trubisky of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers presented as potential wins for them, maybe build some momentum and build some steam going into a tough stretch. And now you probably lose that as well.
Definitely. Let's talk about some other injuries. The most notable and interesting one to me is George Kittle. He's not going to practice today, dealing, I think, with a groin injury. Kyle Shanahan said that he expected him to be out there today, wasn't ready to go. I feel like with George Kittle, this happens like semi-frequently where all of a sudden you find out that George Kittle's not going to practice and then he's got some like phantom injury that you didn't know about before. It does feel like he usually winds up playing, but I mean, if you drafted George Kittle in fantasy, you're expecting him to be your top tight end until the 49ers bye week. You might want to start looking at the waiver wire to see if you need to add another tight end. I'm kind of in that position right now as well, but what do you make of this whole George Kittle situation?
Yeah, he's our consensus tight end 4 according to PFF fantasy rankings. He's obviously a premier player at the position. He is a frustrating player to have on your roster because, like you said, it's not that you know about it. All of a sudden it's Thursday, you're cruising along, you think you're going to, you're looking at your lineup all happy, you're going to beat your buddy, and then all of a sudden it's, hey, George Kittle day-to-day with X injury, and you're like, where did this even come from? So, I think you got to look at the waiver wire, like you said. A guy like Albert O is back in practice now for the Denver Broncos. Maybe he's available. You start looking at your streaming options, but from a football standpoint, it's a huge deal because he impacts the run game as much as the pass game. Obviously, he is maybe the best blocking tight end in the NFL, and Kyle Shanahan loves that, using him in that capacity. So they do have the Chicago Bears week 1. Maybe they're not overly concerned, and maybe him being held out or him not practicing has a little bit to do with that as well. They're 7-point favorites in Chicago. But yeah, it's a big loss because he impacts every single snap, unlike some other players where maybe they're only, single faceted. He does it all.
I don't want to get too far down the line on this situation, but it also, could have an impact on Trey Lance and the 49ers in general and the quarterback situation. Like, as soon as you enter Jimmy Garoppolo into the mix as the 49ers backup quarterback, struggles from Trey Lance will be more important. They will be more notable. And if he doesn't have George Kittle in week 1, and then you're looking at his stats, 4 weeks into the season and they're down or they're not where you expect them to be, or the 49ers get off to a slow start on offense or whatever it is, then you do probably start to have those Jimmy Garoppolo conversations. I'm not saying it's fair. I think the 49ers should give Trey Lance, as long of a leash as they would have if Jimmy Garoppolo was not there. But the simple fact remains that Jimmy Garoppolo is there now, and if expectations are high for the 49ers in a wide open NFC, then Trey Lance is going to have to perform this season.
No doubt about it. He needs all the help he can get. It's the lowest total in Vegas at 40.5. It's the lowest of the entire week. So they're not expecting a lot of points. And yeah, I think Lance in a game against Chicago, you don't have to win. You have to also put up maybe a great stat line. It's not just about getting W's. I mean, I guess Garoppolo kind of made a career out of getting W's and not really doing anything production wise. But I think fans would want to see him not only win, but also, put some stats on the board.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, he did have I think it's an 80.0 PFF grade since he joined the San Francisco 49ers. So for as much crap as we all give Jimmy Garoppolo, he was actually a pretty decent quarterback when he was the starter for the 49ers. Let's also talk about Michael Thomas. He was at practice today for the Saints, said that the goal is for him to play in week 1. This is another one where it's kind of amazing that we're still talking about a Michael Thomas injury. Feels like it's been like 10 years since he's actually been on the field for a game.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. So it sounds like he tweaked the hamstring a couple weeks ago or maybe a week ago, and he is now trending towards playing. Our friend Nick Underhill at New Orleans.football said in the open portion of practice, he looked like he had zero, restrictions or was unbothered by it. But head coach Dennis Allen would not commit to him playing or not playing against the Atlanta Falcons this weekend. And it's a big loss for them. Obviously, they have Chris Olave, they have Jarvis Landry, but whenever he's out of the lineup, those guys get constricted and the defense can focus on them. So they want Michael Thomas in this lineup. Like you said, it is at this point, it's crazy. We're still talking about it. He was the consensus wide receiver 20, and this is why. I mean, when he plays, he's a top 5 wide receiver, but the if he plays or when he plays is a big if, unfortunately, at this point in his career.
Yeah, fantasy-wise, there was a lot of those guys where if they live up to their potential, they could be wide receivers 1, 2, or 3, and but you just can't really count on them, and he's definitely one of those guys. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson talked to the media today. He said that he's still having conversations with the Baltimore Ravens about a contract, but his deadline to get that deal done is Friday. So that's pretty massive. The time is certainly running out for them to get that deal done. I know that there was a report today that said that there was some pessimism around the contract, but it feels like something. I don't know. What's your read on this situation? I guess I'll ask.
Yeah, so this is one of the situations that obviously, you know this as well as I do, where you try to ask around and it's, it's
Right.
one of the hardest situations to gauge in the NFL because he obviously does not have an agent. And so folks aren't really hearing much. I will say one person said they thought there was optimism earlier this week that maybe it was trending towards getting done. They thought maybe it would be a shorter deal, and that was kind of where the concessions from both sides would be almost like a Kirk Cousins, but more money, like a 3 franchise tags, right? Because they're obviously right now probably threatening 2 franchise tags, or that is the undertone of negotiations, and you work off of that. So nevertheless, the Friday deadline, I mean, that is kind of most teams or a lot of teams' deadlines. They want to get deals done before the season starts. If he was a Pittsburgh Steeler, that would be the team imposed deadline. So,
Yep.
I think him saying it is certainly meaningful, and obviously, he seemed, I don't know if he's frustrated, but he seems fed up with the process. But that is a standard deadline. It's why Dawson Knox got done today before the game tomorrow. These teams want to handle this business and put it aside before they actually start playing some real football.
This might be. I think it benefits Lamar Jackson to get this deal done. I think he should want to get this deal done, and he is a guy who dealt with some injuries last year. Certainly from our system, did not grade nearly as well last year as he did the year before. And the year before, he didn't grade as well as he did the year before that. I think he's a fantastic quarterback. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But I also think that there is some risk that if he's, if the Ravens are offering near top dollar for a quarterback right now, I know that he wants the guarantees. I know he probably wants to be, certainly one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, but feels like there's got to be some common ground that that they can find here to get what everyone wants in this deal. Because, I mean, the Ravens should want to sign a deal before quarterback contracts blow up even more with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. But I also do still think that there's some risk involved here from Lamar Jackson to not get a deal done before the season starts.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think Russell Wilson, I'm sure the team's caught wind, but my perception was he probably wouldn't get done this offseason. I kind of just watched the Matthew Stafford situation. He took a year and then obviously signed his extension this offseason. So I thought that'd be the same. But now you have another quarterback making $49 million per year. Yeah, the guarantees are not obviously, on a Deshaun Watson level. That is a 4th deal for Russell Wilson now. So a very different situation. But yeah, just another data point that kind of probably works in Lamar Jackson's favor, at least from a valuation standpoint, not the structure. I think he's probably looking for 48 plus million and then also wants it almost entirely or entirely fully guaranteed. And I'm just not sure Baltimore is going to go there on a 4 or 5 year deal.
I know that we're getting ahead of ourselves here, and this wasn't on the rundown that we included for this show, but I've been talking to people around the league about Tua Tagovailoa today, and everyone expects him from everyone that I talk to. Everyone expects him to have a breakout season for the Miami Dolphins this year. But I feel like whenever they say that, that's tempered with also talking about the limitations that he has as a quarterback, that, if there's pressure, things break down for him. He's a guy who, there's some questions about how well he can throw the deep ball. He's a guy who probably needs to get rid of the ball quickly, kind of be, somewhat of a system quarterback. But I mean, next year we are going to be talking about a Tua Tagovailoa contract. And I'm just curious for you, what you think that Tua would have to do this season to get one of those. He's not going to be a top of market guy, but we're talking about, Kirk Cousins makes $35 million. That's probably the floor at this point for who you consider to be a franchise quarterback. Derek Carr is making $40 million a year. That could wind up being the floor for one of these longer term contracts. It feels like people are already presenting it as, if Tua Tagovailoa has a good season this year, it's because of the weapons around him, and it's because of the system that the 49ers have implemented. And if that's true, can you sign him to a franchise quarterback type deal?
I think when I answer this a lot, when people talk about, is there going to be a bubble burst at quarterback and all these questions about quarterback contracts, I think the biggest change we're going to see, I would compare Tua Tagovailoa to a Baker Mayfield, where he might show he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, but people, like you said, are going to give all the excuses in the world. Baker Mayfield was more the offensive line than the weapons, but nevertheless, just a lot of excuses for why they succeeded when they did succeed and not always succeeding. And I think instead of giving those early deals that are lower value, they're going to make guys play through the 5th-year option, or at least play his 4th year of his rookie contract and approach that 5th-year option. So for me, generally, the answer is for him to sign any extension, I think he would have to be remarkable. Like, I think he would have to look like a legitimate top 8, top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And for people to say that it wasn't because of Tyreek Hill, it wasn't because of Jalen Waddle, it's because Tua just took the biggest step, we've seen since Josh Allen type thing. I just think that middle ground, and maybe it'll reverse, and maybe some teams will find value and say, oh, I'll pay $32 million a year for Tua Tagovailoa if he'll take it, instead of chasing that $50 million a year quarterback. But I don't see that in the near future. I think it's going to become a much more like one or the other decision of, we want a guy that is a Justin Herbert, or we're going to hit the draft again. If you have a Tua, a Jalen Hurts, go so on and so forth, and just not commit big money to an average quarterback.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation where the Dolphins obviously had 2 first-round picks going into next year. One of those was forfeited because of the tampering situation, so the Dolphins have less maneuverability if they did want to get one of those top quarterbacks in next year's draft. But as you mentioned, they have the ability to go more year to year, since Tua was a first-round pick where you give him the 5th-year option, then you franchise tag him a couple of times. Yeah, I think it would almost be difficult for Tua to ascend so highly this season where you would want to give him that $45-50 million a year deal, because I think that everyone is going to credit his success with Mike McDaniel, with the weapons around him. And I mean, I was talking to Rick Spielman about Tua. It's going to be in the piece for tomorrow. And he was saying that, from what he was seeing in the Dolphins offense this year, they don't even necessarily want him to go through progressions. They just want him to get rid of the ball as quickly as possible, get it into either Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, Tyreek Hill, whoever's hands, and allow them to make plays. So we'll see if that winds up being the case this season, but certainly an interesting situation that we're going to be monitoring for the next 12 months or so. But speaking of contracts, some other deals that could potentially get done before week 1. Quenton Nelson still out there without a contract. You've got C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was just acquired by the Philadelphia Eagles. Anyone else that you're really monitoring for contracts to get done before week 1?
Yeah, I think those two are certainly notable. Although I would say, the Eagles, we're used to them getting deals done as soon as possible. Maybe they tried to get a deal done as a part of the trade, couldn't, and are still working towards it. Another similar player, I think Amani Hooker with the Tennessee Titans. There had been reports that they had some preliminary conversations. A really good safety next to Kevin Byard would become another team paying 2 safeties good money. But I think you look at that secondary and look at that defense, frankly, and you realize the value of Byard and Hooker on the back end. He's a very good player that can come down in the box, can play a little bit in the slot, can do a lot of different things. That's a guy I'm keeping an eye on before week 1 kicks off.
Yeah, definitely. We had the Hard Knocks finale last night. Was there a specific moment that stood out to you from the Hard Knocks finale?
Yeah, I guess our guy Khalil Pimpleton. I mean, how do you not love the guy, right? It just keeps the most positive energy. I think when they told him he was cutting him, he was like, "All right, cool. I'll figure this out. I'll go somewhere else. I'll keep just working hard." And yeah, I just think I do think it's cool when you see all these guys talking about how much it meant to them that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes were just very real with them, very honest with them. For me, I think we take for granted, maybe folks don't realize, even kind of a random aside, but Zadarius Smith today apparently bought his captain chain. I guess it's kind of the Packers made him a captain the first 2 years he was there. Then he wasn't a captain the 3rd year he was there. He felt slighted. He said he would walk through the building and coaches wouldn't ask how his back was doing, and people would freeze him out and not talk to him. There is some ugliness that goes on. And I think that I hope that even if there isn't a ton of on-field success, that other buildings still want to emulate the respect and the culture that is being built in Detroit. It seems genuine. It seems real. And I hope it does lead to results, because obviously, there's a copycat league more for results than that. But, I thought it was just cool to see that throughout the entire episode.
It did seem to kind of physically pain Dan Campbell anytime that he had to talk to someone about cutting him. I know he kind of was giving the same spiel at times, but it really did seem to affect him. And he really did seem to obviously hate that process of having to cut players. I know that, all coaches, all teams kind of hate having to do that, but it certainly seemed a little bit more meaningful or tough for Dan Campbell. What did you think of Eminem at the end of the episode? I thought I personally thought that Eminem seemed like he acted like he was a little bit too good to be there, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. Oh, I think he's trying to come off as maybe cool or something like that, trying to be aloof and a little bit low key. That might just be who Eminem is at this point. But yeah, no, his spot was funny. You're talking about lining up with some lineman was chatting with him, and he was saying if he wasn't wearing skinny jeans, he would have done an Oklahoma drill or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's a fair question.
All right. Well, I think that will do it for this Wednesday's episode of PFF Wire. Keep it on pff.com for all of your news and analysis. Download the PFF app. You can also sign up for PFF Plus for $79.99 per year. You get a free weekly trial of PFF Plus, which if you haven't done already, I don't know what you're waiting for, is the best deal in sports right now because it is free to have PFF for a week, and then you can decide whether you want to keep it or not. You can follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed, and we will be back with you guys again on Monday to recap everything that we've seen throughout the week in the NFL world. Very excited to have football back, and we will talk to you guys again soon.